The admission forms were signed, the heavy doors locked behind her, and for the next 24 hours, Marilyn Monroe would cease to exist. In her place would be patient number 847, admitted for nervous exhaustion and emotional instability. What she witnessed inside those walls would shock the nation, trigger a congressional investigation, and transform how America treated its most vulnerable citizens. But first, she had to survive the night. It was February 7th, 1961, at Payne Whitney Psychiatric Clinic in New York City. The building loomed over East 68th Street, all brick and barred windows, a fortress designed to keep people in rather than welcome them. Inside, 300 patients lived in conditions that the public never saw and rarely imagined. Today, that would change. Marilyn Monroe arrived at the clinic in a simple gray dress, no makeup, her famous platinum blonde hair covered by a dark scarf. She carried a small overnight bag containing only the essentials. To anyone who didn't look closely, she could have been any woman in crisis seeking help. That was exactly the point. "Are you sure about this?" her doctor, Ralph Greenson, asked her one final time as they sat in his car outside the clinic. "Once you're admitted, I won't be able to pull you out immediately. The staff can't know who you really are, or the whole investigation will be compromised. You'll be treated like any other patient." "I'm sure," Marilyn said, though her hands were shaking slightly. "My mother has been in institutions like this for 20 years. 20 years, Ralph. And I've always wondered what it's really like, what she really experiences every day. The official reports say standard care and comfortable conditions, but I need to know the truth." Marilyn's mother, Gladys Monroe, had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia when Marilyn was just 7 years old. For most of Marilyn's life, Gladys had been institutionalized, moving from one facility to another. Marilyn paid for her care, visited when she could, but always felt like she was seeing a sanitized version of reality. The staff knew who she was. They cleaned things up before she arrived. They assured her that her mother was receiving the best treatment available. But Marilyn had her doubts. She heard stories from other families. She read reports from advocates who were trying to expose the conditions in psychiatric facilities. She saw how her mother seemed to deteriorate rather than improve despite years of treatment. And she began to suspect that something was very wrong with how America treated people with mental illness. So she devised a plan. With the help of Dr. Greenson and a sympathetic journalist named Mary Nichols from the New York Post, she would go undercover. She would check herself into a psychiatric facility as an ordinary patient, experience what her mother and hundreds of thousands of others experienced every day, and document the truth. Then she would tell the world. The plan was risky on multiple levels. If the staff discovered who she was, the investigation would fail. If something went wrong, if she was hurt, or if her mental state actually deteriorated, it could destroy her career and her life. If the public found out, they might use it against her, fuel the narrative that she was unstable, damaged, difficult. But Marilyn had decided that some things mattered more than safety or reputation. "I've spent my whole life being treated like I'm fragile," she told Dr. Greenson, "like I might break at any moment. Maybe I am fragile. Maybe I do break sometimes. But that doesn't mean I can't do this. That doesn't mean I shouldn't try to help people who can't help themselves." The admission process was deliberately designed to be dehumanizing. Marilyn stood in a small, cold room while a nurse went through her belongings, removing anything that could be dangerous. Her scarf was taken, her belt, the laces from her shoes, even her hairpins. "Name?" the admitting nurse asked, not looking up from her paperwork. "Norma Jean Mortensen," Marilyn said, using her birth name. It felt strange on her tongue after so many years of being Marilyn Monroe. Reason for admission: I've been having trouble sleeping. Anxiety. My doctor thought I needed rest. The nurse made a note. Any history of mental illness in your family? Marilyn hesitated. My mother, schizophrenia. The nurse's expression didn't change, but she made another note. That single piece of information, Marilyn would later learn, had already determined how she would be treated. The daughter of a schizophrenic was suspect by definition. Anything she said or did would be interpreted through that lens. Follow me, the nurse said. They walked down a long corridor painted institutional green, lit by harsh fluorescent lights that buzzed and flickered. The smell hit Marilyn immediately. Disinfectant trying to cover something worse underneath. Urine, sweat, despair. She fought the urge to cover her nose. Behind doors on either side of the corridor, Marilyn could hear sounds: crying, shouting, someone laughing in a way that didn't sound like joy, a rhythmic banging, over and over. The nurse walked past all of it without reaction, as if these sounds were as normal as birds chirping. They reached a large room that appeared to be a communal ward. 20 beds lined the walls, separated by thin curtains that provided the illusion of privacy, but offered none. Most of the beds were occupied. Women of all ages lay or sat on them, staring at nothing. Some rocked back and forth. Others talked to themselves. A few looked up as Marilyn entered, their eyes empty of curiosity or hope. This is your bed, the nurse said, pointing to one in the middle of the row. Breakfast is at 7, lunch at noon, dinner at 6, lights out at 9. Do not leave this room without permission. Do not speak to other patients without supervision. Do not touch the windows or the doors. Violation of rules will result in restriction or isolation. Any questions? Marilyn had 1,000 questions, but she said no. Someone will be by to give you your medication shortly. The nurse left. Marilyn sat on the bed. The mattress was thin and hard, covered in a plastic sheet that crinkled when she moved. The pillow was barely thicker than a folded towel. The single blanket was rough and smelled of industrial detergent. She looked around the room at the other women. None of them were looking at her anymore. They had returned to their private worlds of pain or medication or madness. How many of them, Marilyn wondered, were actually sick, and how many were just inconvenient, difficult, different? In 1961, a woman could be committed to a psychiatric facility for almost anything: for being too emotional or not emotional enough, for refusing to obey her husband, for drinking or promiscuity, or simply being too much trouble. The standards were vague, the procedures informal, and once you were inside, getting out was nearly impossible. A woman in the bed next to Marilyn suddenly spoke. "You're new." Marilyn turned. The woman was probably in her 40s, though she looked older. Her hair was gray and unwashed, her face lined with exhaustion, but her eyes were alert, intelligent. "Yes," Marilyn said carefully, remembering the nurse's warning about not speaking to other patients. "First time in a place like this?" "Yes." The woman nodded. "You'll learn. The trick is to do what they say and don't complain. Don't ask questions. Don't tell them how you really feel. They say they want to help you, but what they really want is for you to be quiet and not cause problems." "How long have you been here?" Marilyn asked. 3 years this April," the woman said. "I came in for a week of rest after my son died. My husband thought I was grieving too much. The week became a month. The month became a year. And here I am. But if you want to leave—" "I can't leave without my husband's permission," the woman said simply. "And he says I'm not ready. Says I still cry too much. Still talk about our son too much. So here I stay." Before Marilyn could respond, a different nurse appeared, pushing a metal cart filled with small paper cups. "Medication time," she announced. One by one, the women in the ward lined up. The nurse handed each one a cup with pills inside and a cup of water. She watched to make sure they swallowed. When it was Marilyn's turn, she looked at the pills, 3 different colors. She had no idea what they were. "What are these?" she asked. "Your medication," the nurse said impatiently. "Take them." "But what are they for? What do they do?" The nurse's expression hardened. "Are you refusing your medication?" "No, I just want to know." "Patients who refuse medication get moved to isolation," the nurse said. "Is that what you want?" Marilyn looked at the pills again. She thought about flushing them, hiding them, but the nurse was watching too closely. She put them in her mouth and swallowed the water. The pills went down. Within 20 minutes, she understood why no one in the ward was talking or moving much. The medication made everything fuzzy. Her thoughts slowed down. Her body felt heavy. She lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling, which seemed to pulse and breathe. This was treatment. This was care, drugging people into compliance and calling it medicine. The hours that followed were a blur of observation and horror. Through her medicated haze, Marilyn watched and listened and tried to remember everything. She saw a young woman, probably no older than 20, who asked to call her parents. The nurse told her phone privileges had to be earned. The young woman started crying, asking what she needed to do to earn them. The nurse walked away without answering. She saw an elderly woman who had soiled herself being scolded like a child and roughly cleaned by orderlies, who handled her with disgust rather than compassion. She saw a woman having what looked like a panic attack, being dragged to isolation by 2 male orderlies, her screams echoing down the corridor until a door slammed and cut them off. She saw the therapy consisted of sitting in chairs in a circle, while a psychiatrist asked superficial questions and took notes, never really listening to the answers. She saw mealtime, where food that would have been rejected by any restaurant was served on metal trays and eaten in silence because talking during meals was forbidden. But what she saw most of all was the absence of hope. These women had been told, in 1,000 different ways, that they were broken, defective, less than human, and many of them had started to believe it. That evening, Marilyn had her first one-on-one session with the ward psychiatrist, Dr. Edmund Walker. He was a man in his 50s with graying hair and an expression of professional boredom. "Tell me about your mother's illness," he said, pen poised over his notepad. Marilyn, still foggy from the medication, but fighting through it, chose her words carefully. "She's been diagnosed with schizophrenia. She's been institutionalized for most of my life. And you're worried you'll develop the same condition?" "I'm worried about a lot of things, such as whether she's really receiving treatment or just being warehoused, whether anyone actually cares about her as a person or just sees her as a diagnosis, whether any of this actually helps people get better or just makes them easier to manage." Dr. Walker stopped writing and looked at her. "You seem to have strong opinions about psychiatric care for someone who just admitted herself for anxiety." "I have eyes," Marilyn said. "I can see how people are treated here. And how is that? Like prisoners. Like problems to be solved rather than people to be helped." Dr. Walker made a note. "This hostility toward authority and treatment is concerning. It suggests deeper issues than simple anxiety." Marilyn felt a chill, despite the medication. She had just made a mistake. By questioning, by observing, by thinking, she had marked herself as difficult. And in a place like this, difficult patients didn't get better treatment. They got more medication, more restrictions, more isolation. "I'm sorry," she said, trying to walk it back. "I'm just scared. I don't understand what's happening to me." "That's why you're here," Dr. Walker said. "To get better. But you have to trust us. You have to accept that we know what's best for you." That night, Marilyn barely slept. The ward was never truly dark or quiet. The lights were dimmed, but not turned off. Nurses walked through every hour, their footsteps echoing. Women cried out in their sleep, or their medication-induced stupor, and every sound was a reminder of where she was and why she had come. Around 3 a.m., Marilyn heard a sound that made her sit up, despite the medication still in her system. A woman's voice, young, desperate. "Please, I don't want to. Please don't make me." Marilyn quietly got out of bed and moved toward the curtain separating her area from the one where the voice was coming from. Through a gap, she could see a young woman, maybe 25, being held down on her bed by 2 orderlies, while a nurse prepared a syringe. "Hold still," the nurse said. "This will help you calm down." "I am calm," the young woman said. "I just asked to use the bathroom. I just wanted to." "Patients who can't control their behavior get sedation," the nurse said. "You should have thought of that before you made a scene." "I didn't make a scene. I just—" The needle went in. Within seconds, the young woman's protests became slurred, then stopped altogether. Her body went limp. The orderlies released her and left. The nurse followed, and the young woman lay there, unconscious, because she had asked to use the bathroom at the wrong time. Marilyn returned to her bed, shaking. This was what her mother lived with. This was the care that Gladys received every day. And this was happening in facilities across America to hundreds of thousands of people. The next morning, Marilyn requested to see the ward supervisor. She was told she would need to fill out a form and wait for approval. When she asked how long that would take, she was told it could be days or weeks. When she said she needed to speak to someone in charge immediately, she was told that demanding behavior would result in consequences. She tried a different approach. She befriended some of the other patients, carefully, quietly. She listened to their stories, and what she heard broke her heart. There was Margaret, committed because she had told her husband she was unhappy in their marriage. That had been 5 years ago. She was still here because he refused to sign her release. There was Susan, who had been admitted after a suicide attempt following a miscarriage. She had been here for 2 years, medicated into numbness, never given real therapy or support for her grief. There was Dorothy, an artist who had been committed because her family thought her bohemian lifestyle was evidence of instability. She had been here for 7 years, and there were dozens of others, each with their own story of how they had ended up here, and each struggling to understand how to get out. "The thing is," Margaret told Marilyn during one of the rare moments when the nurses weren't watching closely, "most of us weren't that sick when we came in. Maybe we were sad, or struggling, or just different from what our families wanted us to be. But after months or years in here, with the medication, and the isolation, and the constant message that we're broken, it's hard not to start believing it. It's hard not to actually become what they say we are." By the afternoon of her second day, Marilyn had seen enough, more than enough. She had the evidence she needed, both in her observations and in the stories the other patients had shared. Now she needed to get out and tell the world. She approached the nurse's station. "I'd like to sign myself out," she said. The nurse looked up at her. "You can't." "What do you mean, I can't? I admitted myself voluntarily. I have the right to leave. You were admitted for evaluation. The evaluation isn't complete. When Dr. Walker determines you're ready for discharge, you'll be released, not before. But I feel better. I'm ready to leave now." "That's not how it works," the nurse said, returning to her paperwork. "Go back to your bed and wait for your next session with Dr. Walker." Marilyn felt panic rising in her chest. She had known this might happen, but knowing it intellectually and experiencing it were two different things. She was trapped. just like her mother, just like all these other women. And there was nothing she could do about it. Except there was one thing. She went to the phone booth in the common room, which patients were theoretically allowed to use with permission. She picked up the receiver and dialed Dr. Greenson's number. A nurse appeared immediately. "You don't have phone privileges," she said. "I need to make one call, please. Requests for phone privileges go through Dr. Walker. You can discuss it in your next session. This is urgent. I need to hang up the phone now, or I'll have you moved to isolation." Marilyn hung up the phone. She walked back to her bed, and she waited. That evening, during dinner, Marilyn noticed something. The staff was less vigilant during meal times because all the patients were in one place and mostly sedated. If she could get to a phone, she might be able to make a call. She waited until the orderly stepped out for a moment, then quietly left the dining area and went to the phone booth. She dialed Dr. Greenson's number with shaking hands. He answered on the second ring. "Dr. Greenson." "Ralph, it's me," Marilyn whispered urgently. "You need to get me out of here." "What's wrong? Are you hurt?" "I'm not hurt, but they won't let me leave. I tried to sign myself out, and they said I can't. They said Dr. Walker has to approve it, and he won't." "Hold on. Let me—" A hand reached past Marilyn and disconnected the call. She turned to see the nurse from earlier, her face hard with anger. "I told you, no phone privileges." She grabbed Marilyn's arm, harder than necessary. "You're going to isolation." "No, wait. I just needed to." But two orderlies had appeared, and they were already taking her arms, already pulling her down the corridor. Marilyn struggled, which only made them grip tighter. They opened a door and pushed her into a small room, maybe 8 feet by 8 feet, with nothing in it except a mattress on the floor and a bucket in the corner. "You can come out when you've learned to follow rules," the nurse said. Then the door slammed shut. Marilyn heard a lock turn. She was alone in the dark. This was isolation. This was how they broke people who didn't comply. And Marilyn, for the first time since entering the facility, felt truly terrified. She sat on the mattress and wrapped her arms around herself. She thought about her mother, who had probably been in rooms like this countless times. She thought about all the women she had met in the past day and a half, all of them trying to survive in a system designed to control rather than heal. And she thought about what would happen if Dr. Greenson didn't reach her in time. Hours passed. Marilyn had no way to know how many. The darkness was complete. The silence was broken only by her own breathing and occasional sounds from distant parts of the building. She thought she might go mad from the isolation, and then realized that was probably the point. Finally, she heard footsteps outside the door. The lock turned. The door opened. Dr. Greenson stood there with Dr. Walker and the facility administrator. "Miss Monroe," the administrator said, his face pale. "We had no idea who you were. This has been a terrible misunderstanding." Marilyn stood up slowly, her legs stiff from sitting. "No," she said, her voice hoarse. "This hasn't been a misunderstanding. This has been exactly what I came here to see. And now the whole world is going to see it too." What happened next changed everything. Dr. Greenson had contacted the journalist Mary Nichols the moment he got Marilyn's call. Nichols had already been preparing the story based on notes Marilyn had smuggled out through a sympathetic nurse earlier that day. When the facility tried to prevent Marilyn from leaving, Greenson had threatened legal action and media exposure. The administrator had caved immediately. 3 days later, the New York Post ran a front-page story, "Marilyn Monroe 24 Hours Inside Hell." The article detailed everything Marilyn had witnessed: the forced medication, the isolation cells, the patients trapped against their will, the lack of real treatment, the systematic dehumanization. The public reaction was explosive. Other newspapers picked up the story. Celebrities began speaking out about their own experiences with psychiatric facilities. Families of patients started demanding investigations. Within a week, the Senate had announced hearings on conditions in psychiatric institutions. Marilyn testified before Congress. She told them everything she had seen. She introduced them to some of the women she had met inside, who had been brave enough to come forward. She demanded reform. "These are not criminals," she told the Senate committee, her voice clear and strong. "These are people who are suffering, who need help, who deserve compassion, and instead they're being warehoused, drugged into submission, and forgotten. We call these places hospitals, but they're more like prisons, and the sentence is often for life." The hearings led to federal legislation. The Community Mental Health Act of 1963 was passed, creating funding for community-based mental health centers and beginning the process of deinstitutionalization. Standards for patient rights were established. Involuntary commitment procedures were reformed. It wasn't perfect, and there was still a long way to go, but it was a start. For Marilyn, the experience changed her profoundly. She continued to advocate for mental health reform for the rest of her life. She visited facilities, always unannounced, checking conditions. She funded research into better treatments. She spoke openly about her own struggles with anxiety and depression, helping to reduce the stigma around mental illness. Most importantly, she moved her mother, Gladys, to a private facility with much better conditions, and she visited her regularly. The time she had spent experiencing what her mother lived through had deepened their bond in a way nothing else could have. "I always wondered why Mama seemed so far away when I visited," Marilyn said in an interview years later. "After my 24 hours inside, I understood. She had retreated into herself as a survival mechanism. It was the only way to endure. And knowing that, understanding that, helped me connect with her in a new way." The story of Marilyn Monroe's undercover investigation became legendary in the mental health community. Activists cited her courage. Reformers used her testimony to push for changes, and patients, former and current, thanked her for being willing to see them as human beings worthy of dignity. Today, while psychiatric care is far from perfect, the reforms that began with Marilyn's investigation fundamentally changed how America approaches mental health treatment. Patients have rights. Commitment procedures require due process. Treatment focuses on recovery rather than just control. And every time someone advocates for better mental health care, every time someone speaks up about their own struggles, every time someone demands that people with mental illness be treated with dignity and respect, they're continuing the work that Marilyn Monroe started in those 24 hours inside Payne Whitney. She didn't have to do it. She could have visited her mother in comfortable ignorance, believing the official reports, never knowing the truth. She could have protected her image, her career, her comfort, but she chose courage over comfort. She chose truth over safety, and in doing so, she changed countless lives. If this story of moral courage and advocacy moved you, share it with someone who needs to know that one person's willingness to face the truth can change the world. Have you ever put yourself at risk to expose injustice? Let us know in the comments. And remember, speaking up for those who can't speak for themselves isn't just kindness, it's humanity.